back. Thanks for having me, and I definitely want to see those pictures. Yeah, it's great to be back. We got a passage today that, for us, in our ears, those of us who we've studied Jesus, we've talked about Jesus, we've read the Jesus stuff, we're like, that is classic Jesus. Coming in, setting it up one way, and then flipping it around. So it takes us, though, a second that we have to kind of put ourselves back into the expectations of the story in order to get the most out of it. The expectation of the story during the setup about who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in the story. The Pharisee is set up as the good guy, and the tax collector is set up as the bad guy. And while the Pharisee is boasting, as a religious leader in the time, it was also kind of his job to lead by example. So while I don't like his phrasing, I can kind of understand why he might be like saying, look, I'm doing the things that we're supposed to do. I'm following all the rules. I'm doing all the things. This is what you're supposed to do. This is what I'm doing. Look, I'm doing the donating. I'm doing the fasting. I'm doing everything, as should you. And that's my job as the religious leader. Now, the finger pointing I don't like, but in some sense, that's the setup, is that he's doing all the right stuff. That should be our good guy. And then there's the tax collector. And remember, in that time, that tax collecting is just state-sponsored extortion. That the tax collector would just show up at your house and say, well, I think you owe us all of this. And if he didn't pay up, the army was right behind him. Some of them would show up with him at the door, ready to commit violence if you don't just cough up whatever they ask for. And sure, some of it would go to state, but a lot of it would go right into their pockets. It was a mob scheme. They were obviously the villains. And you later on the cultural bit, that this tax collector is a Jewish person because they're going to the temple, but is working for the Roman Empire, which is oppressing his neighbors. So there's that layer too. This guy's also a sellout, so he's a thief and a sellout. And so this is obviously the bad guy. That's our setup. Of course, we know what happens next. Jesus is going to flip the script and say that the one that we are expecting to be the bad guy is actually the one who's going to find some healing in the soul, and the one that we get the setup as the good guy is actually the one who needs no extra celebration in heaven. He's doing a good job celebrating himself right now. So that's kind of that flip that we see, but there's another layer to it too. This is the other thing that Jesus does when he is doing his sermons and his teachings that is so extraordinary, is this. In the time in which he's teaching, and it's important also to recognize that Judaism too has gone through 2,000 years of reformation and changing as well. But in the time he was teaching, there's the heaviest focus is on what do you do. It's about your actions. That interior motivation doesn't really play into it. You look at the rules in Deuteronomy and Leviticus and all these places that outline how to be a good Jewish person that are there, and they're action-oriented. You do this thing, you don't do this thing, but you do this thing, but you don't do this thing. And if you act accordingly, that will give you salvation. But this story is not action-focused. In fact, a lot of what Jesus does in ministry, one of the major shifts that Jesus is bringing to this understanding of faith and religion is this understanding that suddenly the interior world counts. Your motives count. Why are you following the rules or not following the rules? Why is this one who's set up to be the good guy following the rules? For good reasons or selfish reasons? Right? So the interior battle matters. And then this person who's not following the rules does have an interior change of heart that has value. That's a major shift, and it's powerful when we think about that in our lives. I admit also, as I was thinking about this, about which of those two to kind of focus on talking about, I was originally going to talk about the Pharisee, because we can still sort of see that sort of religious leader sometimes out and about today, especially if they're waving the signs like, you're all sinners and stuff like that. What is that other than the modern equivalent of this? But I became just so captivated by the story of the tax collector as I was reading it again a few times over. It seems so descriptive of the grief and the humbleness that happens during those epiphany moments when people change. That I know Jesus is sharing these as stories, but it makes me like, oh, he's seen that. That he knows that way that people become when they realize that they need to change their lives. Have you seen people going through those sort of epiphanies? Have you been that sort of person who's been like, I need to change my life? A lot of times it looks like that. It looks like the long dark night of the soul. It looks like grief. It looks like humbleness. It looks like sadness and pain as we come to terms with whatever it is we're wrestling with. And as I was reading that, I was thinking of a friend of mine. So back in my home church, this was the church I was in when I was kind of starting to feel a sense of call, and kind of nurtured that in me and then sent me off to seminary. In that church, I had a friend who was on the session with me and was at times a mentor and at times just someone to talk to. He was a great guy. He was funny. He had a great sense of humor. He always had me in stitches. Not always appropriate humor, but great humor anyway. And I really adored this guy. He was really great. And I was talking to some friend about him. I'm like, what? This guy's—he's an interesting guy. Like, what's his story? I don't know much about his story. And it was one of the other church leaders. He goes, oh, you should get his story. He's a bit of a war hero. This guy? Is he? What? Go ask him. So I went and I talked to him. I was like, so what's this I hear about you being a war hero? And he did not like that word. Not because he doesn't recognize that there's valor that comes into play at times. He didn't like the hero word because he was too intimately attached to the price. A lot of times heroism comes with price. Especially if there's medals and awards that come with it, there's a price. And he was so close to that price that he didn't like that. He didn't like that word, but he did tell me the story. And it's almost like a movie type situation where all this stuff happened. There was a helicopter crash. Some people didn't survive that. There was a very fierce battle that happened. This was in Vietnam. Very first battle that happened afterwards. Some of his friends didn't survive that. Some few were eventually rescued, him and a few others. And in a nutshell, that's the situation. And it was hard on him. He, like many others who have been through stuff like that, carried for many years a lot of guilt that he survived when his friends did not. Like, why did I and they did not? It's a hard one. That's a hard burden to carry. And so he, like many others down that path, turned to substances to numb that pain. And for him it was alcohol, and he drank a lot. And then he was in and out of hospitals, in and out of jails, in and out of rehab. But rehab doesn't work if you don't want it to work, and so that cycle just kind of continued. And he'd been hearing over and over that this pattern of your life only goes one place, downhill and eventually to the grave. You're drinking yourself to death. But it didn't click. And then at one point, he's like, I don't know why when this time the doctor told me it clicked when it didn't the other time, but the doctor essentially said, next time I see you will be to pronounce your death, just so you know if this continues. And for some reason that time it clicked, although he'd heard these sort of dire pronouncements before. And he went back into rehab and back into a group, but this time with the intention of actually working towards it himself. And it is this moment that he had. It is the moment that we saw here with the tax collector, the moment of holding that grief and holding that loss and holding that desire to make something out of it, out of his life, that whatever's left of it. And all of that heaviness is what drove him to finally make the change in his life that he needed to make. It is this. This is what it looks like sometimes when we do that terribly hard work in ourselves. And he did change. I don't know how many years of sobriety he's up to now, but it's a big number. He still goes to groups all the time. He's a mentor for a lot of other people coming up. I was telling him how, like, look at the impact you're having. This is fantastic. And of course, humbleness is part of this story, and humbleness is his journey too. And he's like, oh, it's not for me. It's not for them. It's for me. I need the accountability. Every day is still a battle, but he's still a fighter, and he's doing great. And the impact of that, the positive impact, kind of rolls off him and into others. We've talked a lot, and okay, I guess I talk a lot about why do we come to church? Because it's something I'm so fascinated about. That there is this space that draws us together to worship together, and worship is definitely one powerful reason. But we talk a lot about community and how we support and how we love each other and take care of each other, and that's a big, powerful reason. And how we want to share that love out in the world, and that this kind of empowers and organizes our compassion for the world, and that's a reason. But there is also, as this story tells us, that inward reason too. That it helps in our souls. That some of us sometimes have things we want to come to terms with, or to change, or to find peace with. And we can do that work here, this inward look. Because it's not just our actions that matter, it is also our motives. And it's also our heart and what's happening inside of us that matters. And this story, this beautiful story, should give all of us hope. Because here is someone, the sinner of the sinners, right? The most reprehensible person in their long, dark night of the soul is finding what? Jesus himself is saying that this person is finding justification, which is kind of an ancient way to talk about that path to healing and forgiveness and righteousness and restoration of relationship. That path is being recognized as being valid. This story tells us that in spaces like this, like the temple where he drew himself up, that we can find that if we need that. If you need that, you can find that here. Peace, forgiveness, love, grace. And I'll say again because I think it's so important. Here you can find forgiveness. It's a beautiful part of what we do. And for that I say, Amen.